Okay, so that was actually a really good intro. You'll see why a bit later in the slides. So I'm Ruben. I'm one of the founders of Datameister. Datameister, we make AI algorithms, and we also make sure that the entertainment industry can make use of these AI algorithms. So think 2D to 3D creations, Gaussian Splatting, and so on. Today I'm just talking about Gaussian Splatting, since it's related to the research that I've done in the past. Well, let's take a step back. Like, this is Assassin's Creed. Like, amazing graphics. You can walk around. You have complete freedom. You have very wide environments. And this is only possible because you have the complete 3D world completely rendered. Not only the geometry needs to be made, but also the texturing, the material properties, and everything needs to be made perfectly, which is a lot of work. Now, how would you do this if you want to have recreate a real-life scenario, like for example here, Hangarka? You want to have that in a virtual world, and you want to have like 6 degrees of freedom inside of area. It would take a ton of work to do this yourself. For example, this is my wife. I want to make a 3D version of her for non-creepy reasons. So what you need to do is take a ton of photos. You do the whole estimation of the geometry. You do the estimation of all the textures and the color. What you get is something that you're not very happy with. You arrive in basically the uncanny valley. If it's far away from being human, you're okay with it. If it looks somewhat like human, but not completely, you find it icky. So, in short, we want to have photorealistic quality and not this kind of like, I'm going to insult my wife, I'm not going to say it. What we want is actually like the Matrix. So Freddy, good one. This is what we want. We want to be able to go around a person in photo quality. Do this the old-fashioned way is you needed a shit ton of cameras. But we want to do that with a lot less cameras. So in image-based rendering, the idea is that you have some reference cameras, like the blue ones, and then you have the yellow one that can smoothly transition and show the scene from different angles. It has a lot of names. One is camera-captured virtual reality. The idea is that you only base yourself on captured images. You do not go back to geometry. Pros is that it's photorealistic. The lighting effects are not an issue. There's no uncanny valley. But there's a ton more problems. There's a massive amount of data. Where do you put your cameras, and how do you fill the holes between your cameras? Those are typical problems. It has a ton of applications, mainly split up in 2 parts. One is immersive applications. You go into a scene and experience that scene. Or you build a collection of 3D assets that you would then want to import into your Unreal Engine to make composition of other assets to make a scene. This is basically the issue. You can't put a 360 camera everywhere in the scene. Luckily, smart people invented something that was called light fields. Light fields was you put a ton of cameras on a wall, and then you can have a virtual camera that moves along that wall, but can also go forward and backwards. Problem is, if you want to do this at scale, for real production, it becomes really ridiculously expensive. Also, the amount of data that you need to capture and process is intractable. This was from Lightroom. They got bought by Google 7 years ago. Never heard back from it. So before AI, this was a bit the problem that we had. Or we had to go back to the geometry, which inherently has issues with smoke, translucent things, lightning effects, or you had too much data, or it was not an impractical solution. In a previous life, I was researching this domain. So I was active in JPEG and MPEG, and I had the honors to meet the 3 inventors of JPEG on a JPEG conference at the 25 years of JPEG, and I took it as a JPEG. at university, we didn't have the budget for these huge camera walls, so we decided to make our own with Raspberry Pis. So yeah, I made these panels. Each panel contained 6 Raspberry Pi cameras. One panel was sub 1,000 euros. One panel made 9 photos. If you use naive rendering without AI and stuff, you arrive to like something like this. The cameras are a bit too far apart, so you have a lot of artifacts. You have your freedom of movement. You can zoom in on other parts because you trace back the light rays back to the reference cameras. But where does AI come into play? It's basically, AI is great in filling in the gaps. It grabs the essence of a scene. And also, you can build different models for different purposes. So for example, like where we had the environments, the 3D assets, you would probably want to have different requirements for what you want to do with it. For example, if you want a 3D asset, you might want to have the ability to relight your asset. Whereas if you have a scene, an environment, you want to actually to capture the light from it. AI models 101 is basically learning by examples. You have, like, you want to classify a cat and a dog, you have a ton of images and the labels, is it a dog, is it a cat, and then you can predict it from that. In this case, you have a couple of reference views, and you want to predict the new view. If you want to do this in 4K, it means that you need to do 8 million predictions, 8 million pixels. This is what they were doing with neural radiance fields. This was, in AI terms, the Middle Ages. You reconstruct entire views. You learn a model from a multi-view, and then you reconstruct one or multiple views from it. It works really, really well. Like, you have really good reconstructions from it, like photorealistic, everything that we wanted. It just had a lot of problems that it's very expensive to model. You model the whole scene in one go. You can't cut it up into smaller pieces. You don't have random access. You can't edit it. You have no control over it. You can just kind of replay it. And the applications for that are actually more limited than you would think. You want more of a link to the geometry without actually having a geometry. So imagine if point clouds and nerves had a baby. So it has elements that has the 3D location, but those elements change color depending on how you look at it. So basically, exit pixels or points or whatever, like these small elements that we are used to have, like in a point cloud, they're small. You need a ton of them. They're redundant. They only have one color. And let's go towards these Gaussian blobs. They are large. They have a spatial extent. They represent a color, and the color changes depending on how you look at it. It does come with a cost, like whereas one point only has location and a color, you need to store more data for one Gaussian. The position of it, the spatial extent and the orientation, and some sort of color function that gives you that returns a color based on an angle that you're looking at it. This was basically the state of the art at the end of my PhD, where we filled this up with our Gaussian technique, which is based more on the light field technology. It had less a link to the geometry itself. And 6-7 years later, they released Gaussian Splats, where they actually put these Gaussian kernels into the space, which, with hindsight, makes a lot of sense. This is just a video I made in our offices, in one of the rooms, with my phone. Just quickly scanned it, used one of the freely available tools, and you arrive at something that is already entertaining and with a lot of freedom of movement. Okay, so to recap, to reiterate, so the difference between point clouds and Gaussian splats, the similar thing is they both live in the 3D physical space. Whereas a point is infinitely thin, Gaussians have a spatial extent. Point clouds have one solid color per point. Each Gaussian kernel or blob has a view-dependent kernel, typically nowadays with spherical harmonic functions, but I'll spare you those details. And if you want to render a point cloud, it requires triangulation to form a full body. Then you can render which is highly efficient, but it's highly efficient because there's 30, 40, 50 years of computer science behind it. Gaussian splats is similarly, you ray trace through those blobs, you alpha composite them together, and that gives you your pixel value on your image plane. So there are downsides to Gaussian splatting. It is a bit less photorealistic than NURBS, or less out of the box, at least. I will give you an example before. But the biggest difference is with NURBS, you had like one big omnipresent AI that captures the whole scene. It's great in filling in the gaps, which therefore has still a lot of use. Gaussian Splat has the benefit that it has a link to the geometry, and it has a potential for like editability. This is a tool called Brush. I'll come back to it later. On the right, you can see the original input images. On the left side, you can see the reconstruction based on Gaussian splats. You could see in the beginning that like it actually first constructs a point cloud, puts those Gaussian blobs there, and then it optimizes, it learns what the best parameters are for each blob locally, and also the position. So it is, in that reason, somewhat linked to the geometry. It will stay close to the geometry, but it will try to make it look perfectly and not per se mimic the geometry perfectly. This is a more detailed example where you can see like all the cameras around a little, bulldozer, and iteratively see the quality improve. I'll replay this actually. And you gradually see the quality improve. There are more Gaussians being added, or the parameters are better found. It is optimized, not measured, which is why it's in this AI realm. You learn the pixel values are learned. It's like find me the best blob representation given these views that we have. The other cool thing about it is it can draw a lot of information and knowledge from all these decades of information of computer graphics. You can use these tricks of rasterization for super efficient rendering. You can use, for example, culling. Like you can decide which blobs can I see, which can't I see. You can cut them into boxes, stream them separately. You can envision methods for levels of detail. Whatever's far away, you don't render all the blobs. Only if you get close, you render all details, and so on. For example, here for a bike, you can see that what is on the bike are all very small blobs, but like in the front where the grass is a bit blurred out, that's because the blobs are big. So that's kind of how you have adaptive spatial resolution. Where detail is needed, you put more Gaussians. Where you don't need a lot of resolution, you can just cover it with one big blob. This is, for me, one of the best examples that I've seen. It's Belgian. People that made this are like EMG Boost. They're here in the room. And this is the Belgian Parliament. And I was shocked that they told me that they could do this now in less than 24 hours. But they admitted as well that the first few times they spent a couple of weeks on it to actually get it right. But it's mainly due to having enough viewing angles and enough photos and enough content and making sure those are all aligned. And they also, what they've been doing really well is also the relighting. You'll see that they've been able to do some relighting on it, which has been hard because what you were actually doing with the Gaussian splat was actually capturing the returning light, so the light is baked in. So it needs some, advances on top of flavors of Gaussian splats to allow for also the estimation of the underlying lightning model or other. File formats, everybody's favorite. The de facto standard is .ply. It's basically like a point cloud, but with splat attributes per point. So the extends the parameters for the kernel, for the color function, etc. There is no compression. There is no real standardization at the moment. No ISO, no JPEG, no MPEG. There was no open one until last week, because every time I open my computer, I need to update my slides. That's basically how fast it goes nowadays. It's basically SPZ. It claims to be the JPEG for 3D Gaussian splats. It's not the first one that I saw. It's from Niantic. Not sure if it's even open, but I could see them trying to push this through to JPEG or MPEG to get this more like as a real standard. But it's still early days for that. Why is compression important? Well, the thing is, at the moment, it is way too many Gaussians typically. They're too well defined, they're too high precision, or too many parameters. Definitely compression factors up to a factor of 100 are still possible and needed to make it practically possible. And you have a whole range, and again, decades of video coding solutions and point cloud coding solutions that you can use on top of this, like entropy coding, quantization, just removing the ones that you don't want, and so on. But the cool thing is, because it is still implicitly linked to the geometry, you can make that link more explicit. You can actually start to rig this. If you map what is in the skeleton back onto to which Gaussians this belong, you can have a man dance. So this gives a ton of opportunities, and this is for me like one of the most shocking things, like especially like head and shoulder models that are, again, like has decades of research on them, very well parameterized. If you add, the learning of the normals and learning of some of the relighting parameters, you can do really, really, really impressive and photorealistic stuff. And this is animated. This is not captured. So this is after the fact animated. You can also even, because like it's an AI model, so you can just drop more parameters in it that it needs to learn. This is actually learning the physical kind of deformations. All very rudimentary, or like a lot of like toy examples, but this was not possible with point cloud. Not out of the box. SLAM, like synchronous location, and I forgot the M. Where you want to map out a room, like what you do with your iPhone, you can do that now as well. But you can also actually have the right lighting. You don't have the just photogrammetry like flat surfaces. You can actually make it feel like it's live. Anyway, as I say, let the beast go. There's a lot of open source stuff here. So the go-to and most full-featured set is Nerve Studio. Requires CUDA. It's more like a real machine learning framework where you need a hefty beast of machine. It's really like training and then inferencing. It has a viewer. It's nice. But then Brush is the new kid on the block. It runs on anything, like on your laptop or not. It's still in beta. It didn't work on my laptop, but it runs on other people's, I've seen. You have online tools, like for example, Polycam, Luma.ai. They do a pretty good job. And then there's, of course, the plugins for Unreal Engine, Houdini, and Unity. The one from Houdini came out about, or at least version 2, yesterday. As you can notice, this is very, very active. No, it came out by basically just 2 years ago. If you use free versions of cloud-based software, be very aware that you are transferring your IP. That's why they have these free versions. It is so that they can improve their systems. So pay for it or use open source. It's an extremely active research field. You can go on forever because it touches on so many aspects. It's so similar to a lot of things that we already been doing in computer graphics for a long time, and it has the power of everything that we've been doing with AI for a while. It all comes together. I think now is very, very fruitful time to do, for example, PhD in this, because there's just so many avenues that you can go to. One that is nice, for example, is the 3D plus time. We actually have the Gaussians that also have a time dimension and they're 4-dimensional. Gaussian frosting is where they actually mimic fur and more difficult textures, and very, very impressive. This GitHub link from Mr. Nerf is probably the best curated overview of all the papers, because the problem now, since peer review is not in a great state and archive is just a dump of papers, it is hard to find curated sources. This is one that's really good. And also radiancefields.com is actually a very good source. Takeaway messages for me, no, for you guys, not for me, I know this, is so basically you have the Gaussian as a unit of visual information. Think of it as a point cloud on steroids. The model, the thing that you transmit and store, is just a set of parameterized Gaussians. They have a location in space, a spatial extent, and some parameters that define the color. It is learned from a multi-view camera input. It's loosely linked to the geometry, and for that reason, it enables some editing and rigging. And traditional methods of computer graphics are transferable, like culling and streaming and random access and all these things. It's not as easily editable as meshes and with material properties, so you give away a lot of control. It definitely needs standardization. For that reason, at the moment, it's still it's hard to use it in professional context because of the limited interoperability, the lack of decent compression. It's still early days, but it grows super, super, super fast. And for every problem that exists, there are solutions from other domains that are immediately transferable. So I don't see any theoretical block for this to actually become a major thing in the coming years. So yeah, we're Datameister. Happy to take questions at the bar. I think it was a transit. Yeah. All right, thanks.